most topical sound agency.
They out here stripping our democracy, piece by piece, city by city, state by state. World ID laws, emergency financial managers, citizens united. We gotta fight it. Move. Corporations are not people too. Money is not speech. Man, in fact, it's the root of all right now. We have the right to be free. Move. Corporations are not people too. Money is not speech. Man, in fact, it's the root of all right now.
Welcome to this edition of Move to Amend Reports, where we connect you with activists and organizers working on the front lines of the democracy movement to bring you the lowdown on corporate rule, corporate personhood, and money as speech. This is the space to find info you need to help pass the We the People Amendment and legalize democracy. I'm Egberto Willies, and
I'm Laura Barnum. We've got an important show for you this week, folks. We've got a conversation about the contamination of Flint's water supply leading to lead poisoning in the population and its connections with the Detroit water crisis with Michigan grassroots organizers Shea Howell of Detroit and Nayyirah Shariff of Flint. Let's kick things off with some news.
The methane gas in Aliso Canyon near the affluent area of Los Angeles is still spewing the toxic and potent greenhouse gas into the atmosphere. It is already regarded as a bigger environmental disaster than Exxon Valdez and Deepwater Horizon's incidents. From the Huffington Post, the well has released more than 91,000 metric tons of methane gas into the air, according to Environmental Defense Fund, but exact toll it has taken on the environment isn't immediately clear. To put the scale of this disaster in perspective, the methane gas leak so far is equivalent to 166 million cars on the road for a full year. That's like putting every man, woman, and child in Philadelphia behind the wheel of a car every day. It's equal to 2.8 million tons of waste to landfills, which is the amount of garbage the entire population of Los Angeles dumps in a year, nearly 3.6 million people. It's also equivalent to 8.5 billion pounds of coal, or the output of 2 coal-fired power plants, or energy use of 722,000 homes for a year. In short, this leak is a massive environmental catastrophe. Authorities expect the leak to be capped later this month. With over 400 natural gas storage facilities in the U.S., regulated under a weak patchwork of state and federal oversight, most with aging infrastructure, how long will it be before another major leak? Tell me, how long, Laura, how long?
Well, only time will tell. There was a time in this country when anything was possible, but now we can't even fix the heating and plumbing systems. According to HuffPost, there are roughly 7.3 million lead service lines in the U.S., and according to an estimate by the Environmental Protection Agency, that's down from 10.5 million in 1988. Service lines are the pipes connecting water mains to people's houses, all lined with lead, and they're mostly found in the Midwest and Northeast. Despite the life-altering consequences of lead poisoning, there's no national plan to get rid of those pipes anytime soon. They explained the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act requires water systems and state regulators to monitor lead levels coming out of people's faucets, and if 10% of samples have more than 15 parts per billion of lead, then the state has to evaluate its corrosion controls. And if that doesn't reduce the lead levels, then the law requires public water systems to begin replacing 7% of their lead service lines every year. Even replacing the lines can be trouble, however, as the law only requires replacing the lines on public property. Replacing the portion of a lead service line on private property is up to the owner, and it turns out that replacing just the public portion of a service line can cause the lead levels to spike in a homeowner's water. That's because the work involved in replacing just part of a lead service line can jostle free lead in the remaining part of the pipe. The Safe Drinking Water Act originally called for utilities to replace the entirety of a lead service line, but lobbying and a lawsuit by the American Water Works Association watered down the rule. No surprise there. There is undoubtedly the work of corporate rule.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. Now, recent news out of Michigan revealed that children have dangerously elevated lead levels in a number of Michigan cities, some posting higher numbers than in Flint. Authorities believe the elevated levels are from old building materials containing lead. No, not water-based. The affected communities contain large numbers of older, decaying buildings. While millions of dollars have been spent to address these old buildings, tens of thousands of residents remain untouched. Where infants learn to crawl and toddlers chew on windowsills, it's a shame. We'll pick up this conversation about the government-created disaster poisoning Flint, Michigan's water supply with today's guests, following the segment of the weekly Grassroots Roundup with Move to Amend's National Director, Caitlin Saposi-Belknap.
Hi everyone, this is Caitlin Saposi-Belknap, National Director of Move to Amend, bringing you the weekly Grassroots Roundup where we share the news and announcements from Move to Amend's national headquarters. This isn't ready for public consumption yet, but get excited because early this year, we'll be putting together our 10-year strategic plan to pass the We the People Amendment to the United States Constitution and unveiling it this spring. We're in the process of soliciting input on the draft plan from our grassroots volunteer leaders. Once the plan is finalized internally, we will be sharing it far and wide, so stay tuned. And we've located a venue and decided on dates for our first ever Move to Amend Leadership Summit. This will be a conference, training, and strategy meeting for our organizational leadership at the local and national level. The meeting will be in May in Washington, D.C., which will afford us the opportunity for our first ever lobby day in Congress with leaders from all of our active states. Our volunteers will take Congress by storm to sway their representatives to co-sponsor the We the People Amendment, House Joint Resolution 48. If you're an active Move to Amend volunteer, you don't want to miss this event. Check the Move to Amend website and contact us to find out more. Our staff have been leading orientation for our new intern cohort. Welcome to Carissa, Grace, and Natalie, and welcome back to senior interns Fayruz, Millie, Kelsey, and Renee. Our interns are an integral part of our team, and we're already very impressed by the passion and dedication of this newest crew and excited to work with them between now and July. If you're interested in joining our intern team and being part of Move to Amend, you can go to movetoamend.org/internships to find out more. We're putting together our barnstorming tour calendar for 2016, and we'd like to come to your town. Move to Amend speakers will be on a speaking and organizing tour through Texas in February and Ohio in April. If you live in those states, check our website for details about when we'll be near you. If you live elsewhere and you want to bring a speaker to your town, email us at barnstorming@movetoamend.org to get started. That's the report for this week. If you'd like more information or would like to speak with someone on our team at the Move to Amend National Headquarters, drop us a line at info@movetoamend.org or call us at 707-269-0984. This has been Caitlin with the weekly Grassroots Roundup Report. Happy New Year. Really looking forward to the year ahead. I'll talk to you again next week.
Coming up next, we have a conversation about the emergency management scandal unfolding in Flint, Michigan, and its harmful effects on Flint residency and our democracy, with Shea Howell of Detroit and Nayyirah Shariff of Flint. We'll get the ball rolling after a quick public service announcement.
Does your elected representative support amending the U.S. Constitution to end corporate constitutional rights and get money out of politics? You can help us find out by joining Move to Amend's Pledge to Amend campaign. Help persuade local, state, and federal legislators to pledge support for our We the People Amendment. Recruit co-sponsors for this amendment in the U.S. House and Senate. For more information, visit movetoamend.org/pledge-amend. That's movetoamend.org/pledge-amend.
You're listening to Move to Amend Reports, where we bring you the voices from the movement to amend the Constitution and abolish corporate rule.
Shea Howell is a grassroots organizer and member of Detroiters Resisting Emergency Management, based in Detroit, Michigan. Shea is a professor and former chair of the Department of Communication and Journalism at Oakland University in Rochester, Michigan, where she teaches courses on communication theory and multicultural and political communication. She's a founding member and board member of the Bog Center in Detroit, a space to nurture the development of visionary organizing rooted in place and history. Her most recent book is Making Sense of Political Ideology. Also with us, Nayyirah Shariff is a grassroots organizer and resident based in Flint, Michigan. Nayyirah is a member of the Flint Democracy Defense League with nearly 10 years' experience organizing local, state, and national electoral and issue campaigns. She's been featured on Democracy Now! And Netroots Nation in 2014, speaking out about the problem with Flint's water supply and with Michigan's emergency management of local governments. Nayyirah has previously worked in the engineering, higher education, social justice, and youth development sectors. Welcome to the show, Shea and Nayyirah.
Thank you. We're very glad to be here.
Yes, I am.
Well, look, it's an honor to have you guys with us. So, look, we're so glad you could join us. But before we dive into the water crisis in Flint and Detroit, we'd like our listeners to know a little bit more about your work at the grassroots level. So, Nayyirah, could you please tell us a little bit about the mission and work of the Flint Democracy Defense League and what inspired you to get involved in that work?
Well, I've always kind of volunteered my time as a grassroots organizer because I figured I have these skills, I might as well use them for the greater good of the community. So we actually formed the Flint Democracy Defense League because we were a group of individuals who were collecting signatures for the petition to repeal Public Act 4, which was the first emergency manager law. And with the appointment of Flint's emergency manager in 2011, we decided that we needed to form a group to specifically confront, the face of this undemocratic law.
That's amazing because very few people are really aware of what's going on in Michigan and a few other states as well. But anyhow, at Move to Amend, we supply the tools and resources to empower grassroots leaders, not only to help build a movement to establish, but for the first time in this nation, authentic participatory democracy, which represents all people, but also raises an army of future leaders well-versed in people-centered history and democratic action, ready to take on the reins when we win. We have great respect for the work of Bog Center. So, Shea, could you please talk about the center's mission and also highlight what you think are among the most effective programs that you guys have?
Well, the Bog Center's mission is to develop and nurture community leadership by encouraging visionary organizing that not only resists these assaults on democracy, but very much creates alternative ways of living and governing ourselves. So we both resist and create alternative structures. And I would say at the Bog Center, some of our most important work has been in encouraging urban agriculture, in developing alternative forms of education, and particularly programs like Detroit Summer and the Boggs Educational Center, which is a school right now that's hopefully will be K through 12 before too long.
You are also a member of the Detroiters Resisting Emergency Management. Will you tell us a little bit about your mission and its connection to your work at the Bog Center?
Yes, well, the Bog Center joined the efforts, as Nayyirah pointed out, to get rid of an undemocratic law that was called Public Act 4, which created emergency financial managers all around Michigan, primarily in communities of color. And that effort statewide was successful. The people voted down Public Act 4, but in a late night session in our state legislature, the governor and the right-wing legislature enacted a new law, which they now call just emergency managers, giving sweeping powers to appointed individuals who set aside all elected officials. And so with that action, we joined a coalition of organizations in Detroit called Detroiters Resisting Emergency Management. And that's what led us to this current fight.
Now, isn't it true that the way they wrote that law as well, it wasn't subject to people being able to rise up against it or poll? Isn't there something of that nature in that law?
Right. What they did is they put an appropriations element into the law. And by our state constitution, any law with an appropriations element cannot be subject to voter referendum. So they not only subverted the will of the people, but they made sure they could continue to subvert the will of the people.
Yeah, I think that was a very important point that needed to be made, because again, that was a constitutional way to take rights away from the citizens of Michigan.
Yes, absolutely.
So the news we've heard coming out of Flint regarding the lead poisoning of the population is horrifying, especially when we learn that the poisoning continued long after it was discovered. Nayyirah, we've heard the corporate-owned news version of the Flint water crisis, which sounds more like a comedy of errors than what appears to be calculated decisions by both elected and unelected officials with the eventual knowledge of the poisoning long before it became public. What's your take on this entirely preventable tragedy?
Well, I would put the media also in that pool of complicit actors and conspiring to really not get the word out and to allow this to continue, because as residents, we went down to city council to the bastardization of what that was and spoke out during public comments. People emailed the elected officials. They visited the elected officials, and they were still in action with that. So the people actually had to go out and do their own research, and really getting Erin Brockovich, water expert Bob Bocott to come to Flint by going onto her Facebook page and showing pictures of the discolored water. And he came here and gave people information and gave people some sort of validation so they could move on to continue to organize and reaching out to Virginia Tech. They really assisted in designing the process for citizen collection of water samples and really pushed the issue. And now what we're having on the ground here with our quote-unquote rescue is we have marginalized communities continuing to be marginalized because the low-income public housing and Section 8 housing are not getting water by these delivery systems. Once again, they're being shunted off to the side.
What kind of action is being taken to correct that? Are there community relief efforts happening to relieve them while you fight with the emergency manager? I assume the emergency manager is still in place?
Well, officially we do not have an emergency manager, but we're still under the dictatorship of the emergency manager law. So
okay.
We have an appointed city administrator with basically all of the powers of the emergency manager, and we have a receivership transition advisory board who has who have vetoed decisions by our local elected officials to give out tax abatements to corporations and other special interests.
As your community takes on this horrible legacy of corporate rule, are you finding that as people are struggling with just the issues of contaminated water, that they're organizing in a political way as well?
Well, it's a whole host of things that are happening because we have many in the community who, as this was going on, really believed and had trust in the government, feasible that their government would lie to them. So you have kids who are psychologically damaged from either being lead poisoning, but that was the latest of the health scares with this, because the overchlorination of the water, people had rashes, their hair is falling out. And so you have like a whole generation of people here that are damaged by that. Their homes are falling apart. The plumbing is falling apart because of the corrosiveness of the water. So you do have people organizing, but you still have people who are really like in PTSD.
Yeah, real. So this story becomes even more tragic when one considers the lifelong consequences of lead exposure on children. And you've already mentioned some of the health effects folks are experiencing. What's the average day in the life of a Flint resident like now that this has happened?
Well, one of the things is like the lead copper rule, and most of our regulations around water is for drinking water. So water for cooking and bathing is not regulated, and there are no protections for that. So right now, the National Guard is only giving out 1 case of water per day. But the water is still not safe to cook in. So they're okay with you not drinking, not using the water to drink with, and to not cook with, but they're not really giving you the resources for you to actually do that. So you also have a lot of people who aren't bathing in the water. So with this daily quota of water, you have people choosing whether or not they're going to wash their hair or if they're going to cook spaghetti.
Oh, my. Because you can't, just to make things clear, what's wrong with Flint's water can't be boiled out of it. It's lead. Yeah. It's a mineral. It's there. If you're supposed to be cooking with it, then you're ingesting it just like if you were drinking it. My word.
Yeah. So we have, and then we also have to, I would say, barrel through, some of the misinformation, because we have many of our elderly or people in the immigrant community, all they know how to do is to boil the water to make it safe. So we have to really educate them on how to use the filters, how to use the water. And really people's whole way of life is being changed, and all these illnesses that are cropping up, people are having allergies to things that they never had allergies to before. I have grand mal seizures from using the water. So now I cannot drive, and people's whole entire way of life has been changed by the inaction and the decisions of the emergency manager in the state of Michigan that decided that balanced budgets are more important than people's lives.
This is a national disaster. And what drives many people crazy, including yours truly, is that the level of this disaster is not being displayed neither by the media or anyone else. I just had to say that this is simply a national disgrace. Look, Flint isn't alone in its struggle with government ignoring their basic needs. Detroit hit the headlines just a couple years ago over another kind of water crisis. The water wasn't poisoned, but was simply made unaffordable under emergency management, which ordered water shutoffs over unpaid residential bills. With many thousands of Detroiters left in an urban desert, which the UN condemned as a crime against humanity. Water being the very essence of life and its total privatization looming large on the horizon, what comparisons and contrasts can be made between these cities, and how does this piece of the puzzle fit into the larger pattern of corporate rule and the systemic oppression of communities, in your opinion? So let's start with Shea on this one, and then we'll move on to Nayyirah.
Well, I think that's a very important question, because there are a lot of similarities. Both Flint and Detroit are facing a water crisis because of emergency manager legislation, which has completely dismantled any ordinary local democratic control. And people need to understand the dimensions of this. 75% of all elected African American officials in the state have been removed from effective local power. So over 50% of African Americans are living in communities where there is no effective local power because of this emergency manager law. And that means people have not been able to use local government and its ordinary checks and balances to deal with this effort to privatize water and make money off of it. So that's the first level. The second level is people in Flint have been experiencing water that they cannot drink, and people in Detroit have not been able to drink water that they cannot afford. So in Detroit, in the last 2 years, 91,000 households have been shut off from water. That is more households than the entire city of Flint. So we are experiencing a human rights crisis because there is no national consensus and certainly no state consensus that water is a human right. And so one of the things that both Flint and Detroit are raising for the nation is, do we understand the fundamental necessity of guaranteeing basic rights to all of our people?
Very well said, Shea. Nayyirah, you want to take a stab at it?
Yes. In addition to what Shea has discussed, we have water and pay one of the highest bills in the nation for water. We have water that we cannot drink, and people in Flint are paying 2 water bills, water that they cannot drink, and then water that they can drink by purchasing water from the stores. Then the other thing that was happening under our emergency manager, Darnell Early, who is now the emergency manager for Detroit Public Schools, is he hired 2 special investigators to build cases to prosecute people for quote-unquote stealing water. So we need to really get together because water is not a human right. And Shea did mention a package of water affordability, the Water is Human Right bill package, which is a series of 8 bills that is currently in our Michigan House of Representatives. That in Michigan we need to organize and do that, but nationally we need to close some of these loopholes where we do have protections for cooking and bathing water, and to make the United States to have a constitutional right to water, because we don't have that currently.
Well, you know, as one of the leaders in our organization always say, the Constitution is not a human rights document. It's a property rights document. No protection for humanity. Look, thank you on that one, Nayyirah. Couldn't have said it any better, both Nayyirah and Shea.
We'll continue this conversation after a quick public service announcement.
Move to Amend's We the People amendment is the only proposed amendment in Congress that addresses both Supreme Court-created doctrines of corporate personhood and money as speech, the very foundation of corporate rule. Passing the We the People amendment is the necessary first step in transforming our democracy to one that truly represents the 99%. Go to movetoamend.org/amendment, read it, and take action today.
You can support Move to Amend reports and other Move to Amend programs by joining our $28 for the 28th Amendment monthly sustainer campaign. Pledge $28 a month to help make the We the People Amendment our 28th Amendment to the Constitution.
You are listening to Move to Amend reports, where we connect the dots between the current issues of our time and the nature of corporate rule. We're talking with Flint organizer Nayyirah Shariff and Detroit organizer Shea Howell about the water crisis in their communities and its connections to emergency management.
Despite the scale of this crisis, corporate media does not seem to have given Flint or Detroit the same level of attention as it would a flu epidemic. But that's not stopping Flint residents from raising awareness and speaking out to the government scandal, including a public teach-in about the water crises in both cities, followed by a People's Tribunal on Water Crimes, which you both participated in. Please tell us a little bit about what was learned at this teach-in in the People's Tribunal. Let's hear Nayyirah first and then Shea.
Well, we had an opportunity to really discuss what was happening on the ground, some of the history that was not really told because it wasn't covered with the media, and just really the people coming together to organize and build coalitions, because some of those people I've never would have even encountered. So really like strengthening, I would say, our building trust amongst the people, you know, like involved in that, and then also building trust across the community, because the community knows we've been fighting this issue since the emergency manager made the decision to switch our water source to Flint River water. So they've seen us. Now we are part of monitoring what's happening with the delivery process. We were able to stop a ID requirement to get water from the fire stations, and also lifting up many in our undocumented community did not know that the water was unsafe to drink because they were not notified and there were not materials translated in Spanish to make it accessible to everyone.
So it was did the People's Tribunal, beyond, which is great to hear about, building alliances and working together, were the associated groups that were there able to form any kind of list of demands?
Yes, this is Shea. The People's Tribunal had originally been proposed by people in Flint over a year ago, and it took us really until this past month to be able to create a forum for that to happen. And the point of the tribunal was to bring together both Flint and Detroit to demonstrate first the human costs of this horrific policy across the state of making decisions about people's lives in absolute crude authority. So we had representatives from Flint talk about what was happening there on the witness stand, representatives from Detroit talking about shutoffs, and then we looked at the defense given by our mayor and our governor. And essentially what they are saying is that they are running governments where the bottom line is the only thing that matters. And in response to that, we had a tribunal of mostly elder, well-respected activists who, I'm pleased to say, acknowledged that these folks are guilty of crimes against humanity. And from that, there's a host of actions to take. Among them, as Nayyirah said, there are bills both at the state level and at the national level about how to protect our water, not only as a human right, but as a public trust.
Great. That's great. So given that Flint and Detroit are both majority black cities and among the poorest in the nation, do you think more attention would have been paid and quicker actions taken had this happened in a predominantly white city?
This wouldn't have happened in a predominantly white city.
And that's your take too, I assume, Nayyirah. That's our take. We're all in agreement.
Yep.
And that's a crying shame too.
Well, I think, though, it's important for us to understand it's not an accident, that there is in this country an assault on the cities that have emerged as centers of African American political power and thinking. And that assault is reflected in this kind of action. And of course, it's deeper than that as well. It goes through our school system. It goes through the use of support of any kind of public responsibility. But there's no mistake. This wasn't an accident. It is part of a national effort to strip African American and progressive forces of political power that has been gained over the last 4 decades.
Well, I do believe you're absolutely correct. It's a function of corporate rule, and it's it's the first line of attack. And those of us that Move to Amend strongly believe that if this can happen in any one of these cities where it, according to the power structure that's in place, that's where they can begin. But if this can actually happen and go on and be ongoing month after month, year after year, then this can happen in any city, anywhere, with any debt at all. It's kind of like Angela Merkel's gang has taken over these legislatures and state houses around the country, and they're just looking for their opportunity to begin this process of pushing people out, especially those who are oppressed and disenfranchised. And that soon is encapsulating, a lot of poor white people too. It's going to keep happening.
From my point of view, there's no question, but this is the first line of attack. But the growing consolidation of control of land and water globally is now beginning to be felt in American cities. And while it's happened to Detroit and Flint now, there's no question, but this is just a testing ground and will be moving into other cities as well.
Yes, this is Nayyirah, and I would like to say that the emergency manager law is what austerity is looking like in the United States.
Oh, well put.
That is so true. I like the analysis that went into that, and that in realizing that this is just a start. Right now, it's a start in minority communities, currently specifically Black communities, because it's an easy target. If you notice, they learn how to work with the media. Notice there's not a whole lot of media that took it on, and even as Rachel Maddow